Okay, I wanted to give you guys an overview of the first few chapters that we read through to the end of Jewel's narrative. I don't know, there's not numbers usually in this book, although it would be useful if there were. Uh, I've set up this little page I'll share with you in the portal. There's another video on Faulkner and modernism and a PowerPoint that goes along with that with notes. And then here is a PDF for As I Lay Dying, which is useful, but I do recommend getting a hard copy of the book if you can order one or get to a bookstore. It's useful for making notes, and this is a kind of book that it's helpful to make notes in because like I said on my note in the portal, it's meant to be a little confusing. But as we put the pieces of the puzzle together and the narrative starts to emerge, that's when I find the book to be really exciting and and rewarding in a way that some other books are not. But it takes a little bit of patience. And one of the things that's not explicit in the beginning is who's related to whom. So I'm going to go over that real quick with this crude family tree. And without giving away any spoilers, um, this family tree here of the Bundrans is the one that we assume to be correct at the beginning. But maybe we'll find some things out later on that might adjust this. That's all I'm going to say. And if you do find out the mystery or the secret I'm alluding to here, please keep a tight lid on it because it's a nice little plot twist, such as the plot is. I will point out though that Addie begins with the letter A, and there there is a connection that Faulkner's making to a book that some of you have strong feelings about, I'm sure, because you slogged through it your sophomore year in American literature. But remember the letter A for Hester Prynne and the reason why she wore the letter A, which stood for adultery. Could there be a connection between Addie, the letter A, um, and Hester Prynne? Possibly. Faulkner indeed read Hawthorne and everything for that matter. So I'm just going to throw that out there for now. Oh, and remember what Addie's daughter, I'm sorry, remember what Hester Prynne's daughter's name was? Okay. If you're answering virtually, some of you may have said the, the word Pearl, the name Pearl. Um, Now, is there a connection between the name Pearl and any of Addie's children? Okay, so those are things I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm not gonna go any further with that. Um, so let's just jump in. Okay, well, before we jump into the text, this is the order of birth. Cash is the oldest, Darl, then comes Jewel, then the only daughter of the family is Dewey Dell, and then Vardaman's the youngest. And when we get to Vardaman's chapters, we're going to see that his is a lot more disjointed than the others. There's a little bit of a debate, um, and I feel pretty strongly about the fact that the reason for Vardaman's disjointed narratives has to do with his age. It's hard to say, but I think he's probably around 4 or 5, maybe a little bit older. Some critics have suggested that he might be have like a developmental delays, that he has some sort of learning difference, um, and that that's the reason for his disjointed narratives. But I don't think that's the case. I think it's his youth and his immature mind that's very nonlinear, very associative, almost right-brained, if you understand what that means through sort of a psychological um, modality, which can be useful in describing the way certain personalities tend to order reality. The right brain thinker tends to be more associative, um, creative, circular, daydreamy, and the left brain type of thinking is very linear, very calculating, very orderly. So there is an interesting contrast in between Cash's chapters and Vardaman's. Cash is very logical and orderly, step by step precision. Vardaman tends to be just sort of like this swirling blur of ideas and fears and feelings and confusion. So there's an interesting polarity between these two brothers that Faulkner definitely highlights. In the beginning of the book, we got Vernon, who is also referred to by his last name, Tull. So that can be a little confusing. Vernon is either known as Vernon or Tull. His wife is Cora, the baker, obsessed about efficiently baking cakes, and it's that second chapter we have. And then they have two daughters, Eula and Kate. All right, Darl is the first chapter, and I've got a little bit of bias. I believe that Darl to be one of the more reliable characters. He's also quite mystical and poetic and philosophical. There's really something very deep about Darl, and there's an empathy that he possesses um, that's apparent in his narratives. Um, but again, I'm a little bit biased. There's other ways you can read Darl, but that's my take on him. And we have this impression of Darl and Jewel walking through this field, and they're following a path in a single file. He says, I'm 15 feet ahead of him. Anyone watching us from the cotton house can see Jewel's frayed and broken straw hat, a full head above mine own. Okay, so Jewel is important to note. Jewel's a big, tall, strapping, strong boy. Darl shorter, even though he is older. The path runs straight as a plumb line, worn smooth by feet and baked brick hard by July, between the green rows of laid-by cotton, to the courthouse and the cotton house in the center of the field, where it turns and circles the cotton house at four soft right angles and goes on across the field again, worn so by feet in fading precision. Okay, I hope that you get some imagery of just how hot the South is. This takes place in Mississippi, in the rural parts of Mississippi, um, in a place called Yakna, County. If you didn't catch the spelling on that, I'll spell it for you when I'm in class. Very, very poor, and still remains a very poor part of the United States. Um, the way of life that existed pre-Civil War was one of tremendous wealth for the people that owned plantations, and we all know that that wealth was created off the back of slavery. So when slavery was taken away and these big plantations were dissolved, people were left either with some. Let me pause for just a second. I'm about to cough. Excuse me. Okay, so um, there was not a lot that one could do to make a living in rural Mississippi, and some people were able to scrape a living by through sharecropping. And the Bundren family is one of these poor white sharecropping families, and they barely at the subsistence level. This little thing that Darl describes that Jewel does, they're walking in a path with Darl ahead of Jewel, but Jewel when Darl goes around the cotton house, Jewel takes the shortcut through the cotton house and overtakes Darl and sort of cuts him in front of him. Excuse me. Now, that tells you a little bit about Jewel's nature. He's very competitive. He's not one who likes doing things slowly. He's very much action oriented. Do do do. Let's get something done. He's not the type to take his time walking around a house when you could walk straight through it. And there's a lot of heat and anger associated with Jewel, and that's a motif that's going to get developed throughout each chapter. At the end of Darl's chapter, there's some important details describing the work done by the oldest brother, Cash, who's a good carpenter. He's hewing trees into boards and taking these boards and cutting them very carefully, fitting them into place. He's, like I said, a really accomplished, skilled carpenter. And he's building this coffin right in front of the window where Addie is laying. And um, and it's where we get this the information that Addie is about to die, and they're so certain of that that they started making the coffin. Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. This automatopoeia is pretty cool. I think another trait of the modern novel, and an adze is like this scooping thing that will kind of like peel off layers of wood in order to flatten out and create boards. And so he's using that special tool called an adze. Then we get Cora. Cora is there visiting the Bundren family, but during her visit, she's also thinking about how she made some cakes that were ordered by this shop in town, and when she took the cakes there for them to be bought, I guess the buyer decided it was too late or she didn't want them anymore, and so Cora is sort of dwelling on this in her mind. A little obsessive compulsive, if you ask me. Now, Cora makes a nice observation about Addie, and it's a nice little scene here, helping us to be in that cabin there with them. The quilt is drawn up to her chin, hot as it is, with only her two hands and her face outside. She is propped up on the pillow with her head raised so she can see out the window, and we can hear him every time he takes up the adze or the saw. If we were deaf, we could almost watch her face and hear him, see him. Her face is wasted away so that the bones draw just under the skin in white lines. Her eyes are like two candles when you watch them gutter down into the sockets of iron candlesticks. But the eternal and the everlasting salvation and grace is not upon her. Cole throws a little bit of shade here, suggesting Addie is dying, but she's dying not under the grace of God. Cora is a very fundamentalist Christian, so you wonder what she means by that. Why is Addie not going to receive eternal, everlasting salvation? Nonetheless, despite her prejudices, I do love that image of the candlesticks and the eyes. That's really haunting and almost grotesque. Another striking image from the beginning of the novel is Jewel, I'm sorry, Darl's chapter in which he describes taking a drink at night from the water bucket. It would be black, the shelf black, the still surface of the water, a round orifice of nothingness, where before I stirred it awake with the dipper, I could see maybe a star or two in the bucket, and maybe in the dipper a star or two before I drank.